Today we're looking at accounting paper 2, November 2022, specifically focusing on question 1 of the paper, which consists of 35 marks and to be completed in 30 minutes or less, of course. So 1.1.1 says choose an example of column from column B that matches a cost category in column A. Now we're supposed to write only the letter A to E next to the question numbers. Okay, so the first one that we have in column A is administration. And when we look at our solutions there, we can see that we have our answer as C because rent expense for the office building is linked to admin. Right, so our answer here is C. Then when we look at direct material, what we want in direct material is linked to raw materials. So our answer there is A. Then selling and distribution, we are looking at option E because this is commission paid to sales staff, right? So this is an expense linked to selling and distributing. So here our answer is E. Then the last one, factory overhead, it would then be the salary of the factory foreman because we know that it's a factory overhead and it is not linked with the direct labor. So that is why workers in production would be direct labor here. And then this option B would then be our answer. So CAEB. Let's quickly fill in. So that's CAEB. Right. And now we're going to quickly move on to 1.2. So 1.2 says Weather Stitches. Weather Stitches, owned by Annie Brown, manufactures bathroom towel sets and buys fabric from local suppliers. The information relates to the financial year ended 30 June 2022. So it's important to note that the year began on the 1st of July 2021, just in case we are needed to draw a timeline or anything similar. And we need to note that there were no work in progress stock balances. Now the required 1.2.1 says calculate the following for the financial year ended 30 June 2022. The first bullet point, we're going to calculate our direct labor cost. Second, factory overhead cost. And then lastly, we will calculate the total cost of production. Now looking at our information A, it is well given to us. Information A says direct labor cost, 6 workers were employed in production in 2021 and 2022. Okay, so we are noting that we had 6 workers. Now each of them, that is very important, each of them worked 1,840 hours normal time during the year at 40 rands per hour. So they are paid 40 rands for each and every hour that they work, and let's remember that there's 6 of them. So the first thing that we'll calculate is the normal rate or normal wages paid. So it's 6 workers multiplied by 1,840 multiplied by the 40 rands per hour, right? Then that will give, let's see, 6 times 1840 times 40, that will be 441,600 plus. Let's look at the other pieces of information. Third bullet point says the overtime register reflected a combined total of 230 hours worked at 1.6 times the normal rate. Okay, so it's they get paid 1.6 times the 40, and this is the combined total. It is not the individual hours that each worker worked, but it is the total that all of them worked. So we have 230. Okay, so let's say 40 first times 1.6. This is their overhead rate, the overtime rate rather, multiplied by the 230 hours total worked by all of them. Then let's see what that gives, which is 14,720. And let's consider the last bullet point, which says production staff received the production bonus of 8% of the normal time wages. So they received the bonus of 8% on the amount that we have calculated on from these 2 bullet points. So it is 8% times 441,600. Okay, so 441,600 times 8%, which is then 35328. And then when you combine all of this, let's quickly see what it gives, which is 491,648. So that's 491,648. Right, so that's your direct labor cost. Then now moving on to the factory overhead cost, let's quickly look at the information pieces. The bookkeeper calculated the factory overhead cost as 541,600. However, he made the following errors which must still be adjusted. So the first one says he included the entire insurance expense of 32,500 to the factory overhead cost instead of only 60% of this expense. So in this case, the entire 32,000 has been included, but we have noted that only 60% should have been included. So we know that, okay, this is 100% because the whole amount was included, but only 60 should have been there, which means there's a 40% extra that was included there. So we need to remove the 40%. So we're going to say 32,500 multiplied by 40%, which becomes, so it's 32,500 multiplied by 40% is 13,000, and we're going to subtract that. Then quickly moving on to water and electricity, he then allocated 54,000. So that's the amount he allocated to water and electricity for the factory using the ratio 3:2:2 for factory, sales, and office respectively. Now this expense should have been split in the ratio 2:1:1. So we know that the 54,000 is this 3 because it is the amount that was allocated to the factory, right? But now we're not given the total cost to use so that we can use it to split using the correct ratio. So we need to first determine the total cost that was split using this ratio. So 54,000 multiplied by what we want. We want 7 because this is 3 plus 2 plus 2. We know that what was allocated to the factory water and electricity was 3 of that ratio. So it's 54,000 multiplied by 7 over 3, which is 126,000. Okay, then now we need to allocate these costs according to the correct ratio of 2:1:1. So we'll say 126 multiplied by 2 over 4 because this is 2 plus 1 plus 1. Okay, and then that will give 126 times 2 over 4. That's basically half, so it's 63,000. Okay, but now we know that they allocated 54,000 at first, but we know that the correct amount to allocate is 63,000. Now we need to move from 54,000 to 63,000. And how do we do that? We need to add the difference between the two amounts. So we're going to say 63k minus 54k, which then gives a difference of 9,000. So we need to add an extra expense of 9,000. So now getting the total is 54600 plus 900 minus 13,000, or 9,000 rather, which is 537,600. Okay, now quickly calculating the total cost of production for 2022. We already have our factory overheads as 537,600 plus our direct labor, we just calculated now, which is 491,648, plus the last thing that we need to consider is our direct material of 652,800 there from information C. So it's 652,800. Then we have got our total cost of production plus 491,648 plus 652,800, and then that gives us a total of 168,2048. So that's 168,2048. Then now we'll move to 1.2, which says any is concerned that fixed costs increased to 806,400. Then we are supposed to explain why she should not be concerned, provide 2 points, and quote figures. So before you start a question where you need to comment, what you need to have is these three components on your response. So you need to know that you need to quote figures like they have said to you. That's the first thing. Second thing that you can do is identify and mention the trend. By that I mean, is it an increase or decrease? Right, that's what you need to mention. Then the last one, you can also calculate the difference. Let's say maybe it increased or decreased by. So here, this is where you say by 50%. It can be in terms of percentages or the rand amount, by 50%, 35%, and so on and so forth. So those are the three key things that you need to have on your response. Every time you do a commenting question, make sure you have these three components on your response to maximize your marks. So let's get into the question. This person is a bit concerned about the fixed cost increasing to 806,400, but we need to explain to her why she should not be concerned, which means there's an element of this increase that is positive. Let's take a look at information C. So information C, when we are focusing on our fixed costs, this is what we're looking at. On the 30th of June, we can see that we had an increase of 806,400 to not of 806,400, but to 806,400 from 792 750. So that is where we are at now. But okay, that is what she is concerned with. But now when you're looking at these fixed costs per unit rather, we had 151 last year and we have 126 this year, which means the fixed cost per units have decreased, which is a good thing. Okay, so let's note this down. So fixed costs per unit have decreased, right? Started with the trend, that's the trend, they have decreased by, right? So now I'm mentioning the difference. It was from 151 to 126. Let's quickly get the difference, which is 25, decreased by 25, right? From 151 in in 2021 to 126 in 2022. Right, so let's see the components. This is a trend, this is the difference, and here I am quoting figures. So that is how you will structure your response. You can start with any and end with any. So now we know that the fixed cost per unit have decreased by 25 rands from this to that. And you can also mention you can go as far as calculating the percentage in percentage decrease or increase, but it is decrease in this instance. So now we also need to look at a certain thing on fixed costs, which I refer to as economies of scale, and which is broadly known in accounting. Now, economies of scale is when we have an amount of fixed costs, right? As 806,400 we do have here, and we divide it by the number of units produced and sold. Like we want to see how many units are going to share this fixed cost. So now, if we are producing many more units and they share the fixed costs, now it will then lead to us having a fixed cost per unit that is low. So it is a good thing that we are producing and selling more units, because if you could look at 2021, what happened was that we had less units being sold or produced. That is why then we had the the fixed cost per unit not being shared amongst so many units. So That is why then we are going to talk about the economies of scale. So we're going to say economies of scale were achieved. So economies of scale were achieved as the production. So now we're going to talk about production increased from, all right. Okay, let's just first say by. So it increased by. Then we quickly calculate the difference. So 6,400 minus 5250, which is 1,150. 1150 from 5250 in 2021 to 6,400 in 2022. So economies of scale were achieved there. Now, that is one key thing that we are going to look at. Then moving on to 1.2.3. 1.2.3 says refer to information C. Comment on whether the production staff deserves the production bonus that they received. Provide 3 points with figures. Going on to information C again, we want to look at our direct laborers and we want to determine if they actually do deserve the bonus that they got, the bonus of 8% that we dealt with earlier. Now, looking at direct laborers, what happened is that they produced 6,400 units this year, and last year they only produced 5,250, which is actually great, and that is actually a good thing. Okay, so that's the first point that we are going to note down. So increase in production levels, right, by 1,150, just like we calculated, from 5250 in 2021 to 6,000. Oops, that's not an amount. So 6,400 units in 2022. Right, that's the first thing. Then the second point that we can focus on, although they produced so many units, they were able to use less direct material. So they were able to use less direct material, but they were also able to produce more units. So when you're looking at this amount, 102 in comparison to 128 last year. So last year they used more material, but they failed to produce more units. So which means that this year they produced, or they improved their production levels. Not only that, but they we could also say they improved their skills, they improved their effectiveness. So we can talk about the direct material that they used this year. So we can mention direct material usage decreased. Okay, let's just say usage per unit decreased by, okay, let's just get the difference. So here it is 128 minus 102, which is 26, decreased by 26 rands from 128 in 2021 to 102 in 2022. Right, so wastage or spoilage of material decreased. You can go as far as mentioning that they were able to use less material but produce more goods, production of more units. Right, and now we're going to look at the last point that we have here. So in this case, we are going to look at our BEP, which is our break-even point. we had a break-even point of 6,156 this year. Then last year we had it at 6,954. If we could look at the number of units produced and sold this year, our number of units that were sold are greater than the break-even point, which means here we made a profit. But last year we produced 5250, but our break-even was 6950. So our number of units that we produced and sold were actually less than the break-even point, which means last year we operated at a loss. Okay, so we are going to talk about in 2021 the break-even point of, don't forget, don't just say the break-even point, show what the break-even point was. It was 6954. Okay, so the break-even point of 6954 was greater than the units produced. How many units were produced? 5254. Then in 2022, BEP of 6,000, let's see, that is 6,156. So 6,156 is less than the units produced, so it's 6,400. So we can then in 2021 loss, but make sure you don't write in shorthand. Make sure that this is always in full sentences. Here we made a profit, and then you conclude therefore bonus should be given based on reasons above. Make sure you do not make use of shorthand, and make sure that your marker understands each and everything that you wrote. Okay, now we're going to move on to 1.2.4, which is the last question. In this question, Annie wants to improve her profit by 50,000 during the next financial year while maintaining costs. So we need to calculate the additional units that must be produced to achieve this target. So in such a case, some might be tempted to calculate the break-even point, but here what we need to consider is that we need to only calculate the additional units. The break-even point has already been calculated, but we need the additional units over the break-even point that will help us achieve the profit of 50,000. Okay, so what we're going to do in our calculation, because that we're going to use the same calculation of a break-even point, but now we need to determine our selling price per unit, which is given as 375, and then our variable cost per unit, which is 244,000. And then this should be an easy calculation for us. So we're going to have the 50,000, right, over the 375 of the selling price per unit minus the 244 variable costs per unit. And then we have 50,000 over 375 minus 244. So that then is 381.68. Okay, so those are not rands, it's just units. And then we are just going to round that up to 382 units, extra units or additional units that must be produced. So if they had said calculate the break even, we would have added the fixed costs here. But we only need the additional units that will help us get to the profit of 50,000. Right. And that is all from me. Please make sure that you subscribe, like, share, and drop a comment on any accounting topics or questions that you might have. Once again, I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.